Check, check. I think depending on where you sit, that's what it's going to determine which.
And whether you're facing forward, facing goes from the left.
How much was there?
I still remember Garth's. Were you here for Garth's 90th birthday sermon? You guys might have come right after that. Garth's 90th birthday sermon. Garth Smith. Yeah. He had a visual aid of the church of the sheep and the goats. He said the people on the left.
Yeah, certainly the gospel.
Yeah.
Jesus' left hand. It's the Father. He's on the right hand of God.
I think 93, I want to say. Yeah. Might have missed it. They're doing pretty good. Maya's well under the weather, so she's staying home, and Alicia worked last night. She's at Allenmore. She's down in Tacoma.
On his earth. Young people?
It's a trip.
Yeah, it's easy for you to say. They're a couple years old.
Wow. You doing better? Yeah. Has he recovered any of his movement or anything?
Squeeze on her hand.
Yeah.
What's his name? Dave, maybe you have more details. A lady, Monica, I don't think I knew her family. Do you know any more? Okay. Okay. So she passed away. Her name is Monica. Okay. Well, she leaves behind, I think, 4 children. They're all adult children, from what it sounds like now, but they're very young, 20s, late teens. So see if we can reach out to them and comfort them and see if they need any help or aid. Morning. Morning. We have some children's classes downstairs if they want to go to those. Or you can come here. Any other prayer requests? Yeah. Say I was staying home with Bailey, who scratches 6'6". said he got real sick these days. Praying for him. I think he's doing better now, but just don't want to spread anything. Anything else? Sorry, is it your cousin or your nephew? Is your cousin? Okay. And what's his name again? I'm sorry. Okay. All right, let's pray. Dear Lord, we are thankful for gathering here this morning. Thankful that we can come here and gather around your scriptures to study them and to think about them more closely. We're excited to think about the temple and how we are now a temple, which is a greater temple than that one that was built so long ago. As we think about these things, we know we have people and members here that aren't able to come and assemble with us because of sickness and illness. So Lord, as we are here, we're not fully here. So we pray for them. We pray for quick healing, for just all the people in our church, especially Bailey, Maya, Brother Jan, and Sister Kraft, as she's just continued to mourn the loss of her husband and so many in her family for the past few years. Pray that we can be a comfort to her and reach out to her this week as well. We pray for Monica, her family as they deal with this tragic, unexpected death. Pray that we can reach out to them and reconnect and comfort them and help them in any way that we can. And just pray for Joe Marcotte and his recovery. Just continue to pray for Rena as she supports him and visits him and cares for him, that she would be able to continue to help in what way she can, and that we can continue to encourage and support her as she goes through the challenge of visiting a sick loved one in the hospital. For all those that aren't on the list, Lord, we just pray quick recovery and that we'll see them again soon. It's in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so this morning we are going to talk about the temple. The church is the temple. And I asked you to read 1 Corinthians 1 through 3 to kind of get ready for this discussion. If you didn't do that, that's okay. We're going to do a quick review to just think about these ideas. And as we go through, we might do even a little bit of review from the last 10 weeks that we've been thinking about the temple and creation, the Eden temple, and all the way through the tabernacle and the first and second temple, and now this temple, which is the church. So to just, 1 Corinthians, I think one of my challenges when I read the epistles, the letters, is that it's always difficult to stay in context. They're letters that are written to an audience, and especially in English when we're reading them, when the author says you, I think me. This letter is to me. And so it's so tough to remember that this wasn't written to me. Most of the letters weren't written to one person. They were written to a church, or they were written to a group of churches. And so the point of the letter was to send it to this church, and then once they had read it and thought about it, talked about it, probably made a copy of it, they would then bring it to the next church, and then they would do the same thing there and keep spreading it, spreading the word of this apostle or this local leader. And so, so that's my first problem. And then my second problem is, as I read through these letters, it's difficult. I think probably because we don't get a lot of letters these days. We get emails, but one of the most important rules when writing an email is keep it short, keep it simple. Don't go past 2, 3 paragraphs because you're going to lose your audience. They're not going to read anything before their phone buzzes and distracts them into the next thing. So we just don't spend a lot of time reading letters and thinking about letters like this. So sometimes it's difficult for me to follow the logic as it goes through the letter. But I think it's an important skill. And luckily, the idea that we're going to be talking about is in chapter 3, so it's not very far into the letter. So we're just going to walk through the first 3 chapters, kind of from a 10-story view, looking down on it, to see how the ideas progress through and why Paul is bringing up this idea of the temple in chapter 3. So we start out with this greeting and thanksgiving, which all letters in the ancient world did at this time. So Paul, the author, he gives some of his credentials, and he says, to the church at Corinth. Okay. And so we get these greetings and this thanksgiving portion and this idea of grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. It's a very common way that Paul opens up all of his letters. And then he kind of jumps right into it after that. In verse 10, he says there shouldn't be divisions within the church. If there are factions and groups and cliques and all these things that are normal, it's normal in human groups to form these things and to get a leader and to hold a position and to vie for power and all that stuff. That's just as normal as the day is long, in human history, but it's not in the church. Paul says this is not how Jesus' people are to behave. And so his idea here is that there shouldn't be divisions because Jesus should be the head. So everybody is united under him. And so this isn't a call to uniformity, right? Not everybody needs to look and act exactly the same. Not everybody could be the same, especially in a church like Corinth, right, where you have Jews sitting next to Gentiles, sitting next to slaves, sitting next to extraordinarily wealthy people. So there's still this like diversity within the church, but there isn't these schisms forming around leaders and popular teachers or little cliques that form as happens in most places. And then he starts talking about the power of the gospel in verse 18. He says, the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but for us who are being saved, it's the power of God. In this gospel, this idea that Jesus was crucified on a cross, again, it's tough to enter into that context, but you have to remember that in the Roman world, to be crucified is one of the most shameful deaths that one can undergo. Citizens of Rome you're not allowed to crucify them because it's so horrific. So if you're a citizen, whatever they do to you, they're not going to crucify you because that's the worst possible death. And so for these people to claim that their Lord was crucified is foolishness. Why would you ever say that the most shameful and horrific thing that a person can go through? Why would you say that's your guy and he's the guy that you're following? It doesn't make sense to the Roman world, and indeed it doesn't make sense to the world today either. But it's the power of God for those that are being saved, particularly because it is how the world functions. It's Jesus is what everything has always been pointing to and what everything will be pointing to, and so the fact that he comes to earth as a man and he dies in this fashion tells us something about reality. It tells us something about God and who God is and what he wants and all these things. And so, in fact, it is what actually brings us into new life, and it allows this new unity to happen. And then he makes this point that God's Spirit brings spiritual truth for spiritual people, and not for worldly people. So if you're having trouble with these spiritual ideas and you're having trouble not forming into these cliques and not having these fleshly desires overcome you, then then in fact you're not acting in the spiritual way that he's asking you to. And he says, starting in chapter 3, he says, in fact, your jealousy, strife, and divisions are evidence of your immaturity. Okay, so he's like, he just kind of lays it out that when I came there, I was preaching this gospel. I wasn't getting complicated about this. This is our message, and this brings unity. And the fact that there are now divisions among you is my evidence. That's the case that I'm bringing against you. That you should think that what I'm saying is true, be convicted in it, and change. Let's jump into chapter 3, start of verse 5. Can somebody read 5 through 9?
Verse 5.
Yes, please.
What then is Apollos? Is that where you want to start?
Yeah.
What then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God is causing the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything. God who gives the growth. Now he who plants and he who waters are one. Each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. We are God's fellow workers, and you are God's field, God's building.
And so hopefully we see how that grows directly out of his argument of these divisions within the church. One person's following Apollo, one person's following Paul, one says, I follow Jesus. He says, these divisions aren't becoming of this group of spiritual people. Each one of us is a worker in the field. So that's his first metaphor, is this worker in the field. Plants, waters, God's the one who makes everything grow. And so hopefully we can see that for us in our context, as we think about moving this context forward, when the fact that John is a much better preacher than I doesn't mean that we get John's followers, and then the one, my wife is the only one that likes my preaching, I'm sure. And so Thomas's fault. We don't do things like that, or this is a better teacher, or I like this person's small group, or whatever it is. We don't break into these factions, even though it was for good reasons, right? This person is a good teacher, powerful in the word. I've been listening to him since Paul left, to go to the next city, and that's a good reason to listen to someone. It's a good reason, they're doing good things in this church. But the fact that they're not keeping their eyes on the true head, which is Jesus, and they're falling into this factiousness, is the problem that he's pointing out. Yeah.
I go back to the day of Pentecost, and I see that, of course, Paul wasn't there. Paul may have been on the other side at the time, but anyway, Peter and the other apostles all stood up, and in individual languages and foreign languages, they all preached the same gospel on that day. And those people that responded on that day had everything that they needed for salvation. It was perfect. And Paul, over and over again, he says, I am preaching the same gospel that Peter and all the rest of the apostles preached on the day of Pentecost. And he says, if I preach any other gospel, let it be in that one. And so that's the message that keeps coming across to me. The other thing is that when you see that snapshot of the church on that day, this is the gleam in God's eyes. My church has been born right here.
Yeah.
And my pride and my love and my blessings pour out on this church.
Yeah.
However many years this was later, 30 years later, what they had done with the gift that God had given them was terrible, the way they ripped one another apart. And it's the same way for parents that look at their children and say, I'm the failure. God gave the perfect gift here. Can we get back to the perfect gift all these men preached on the day of Pentecost?
Yeah.
Can we leave behind all of the things that we festooned on as adornments,
Yeah, and the day of Pentecost is a great image for this because the way that I always think about it is it's the reverse Babel, right? Where the Tower of Babel, they're building this thing for themselves, for their own name, and then God comes down and scatters them and divides them into nations and gives them different languages. They can't do this thing. Whereas the Tower of Babel, or excuse me, the day of Pentecost is the opposite, where the Spirit fills these men, and then they're speaking in all these languages, bringing all these different people all into this unity under Jesus. And so it is that gospel of which they return to, and it's fascinating because it's not that they were all speaking in Hebrew and there was some sort of miracle that everybody could understand them. It was no, they were speaking in all these different languages, the same gospel, which is a beautiful thing about Christianity in particular. Is it's not for Jews. It's not for one people. It's a movement it's the way of being that extends for all humans everywhere for all time. And so it's not constricted to one spot or one language. It has to be in the original Greek. It has to be in the original Hebrew.
So you go to each one of these regions, Corinth, Ephesus, and he goes back to each one of those churches and he says, remember, some of you were actually there on the day of Pentecost.
Yeah.
And you know where ground zero was at one time. And you're looking at something that's other than ground zero. It's plus this, plus that, plus this. He says, when will we be able to get back to the original? What a disappointment we are. No wonder God was jealous.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, so verse 10, we're going to read verse 10, 11 here. It says, according to the grace of God, which was given to me, like a wise master builder. Oh, yeah. So real quick. So he's talking about this planting metaphor, and then he switches. You see in verse 9, he switches he says, yeah, you're like a field or a building. It's like, okay. And then he's like, so as a master builder, right? So he just kind of takes a quick turn, changes his metaphor here. According to the grace of God, which is given to me, like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation, and another is building on it. But each man must be careful how he builds on it, for no man can lay a foundation other than the one which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, he's about to start talking about the temple, okay? Have we, as we've done this study, have we encountered a story about laying the foundation for a temple in the Bible? When does that occur? When does that happen?
Solomon's day.
Yeah, so Solomon, he lays the first temple's foundation. Ezra and Nehemiah is probably the most focus goes into this foundation / cornerstone / idea, whereas Solomon, it's kind of more on the whole project overall. And why is that significant? Why is especially for Ezra and Nehemiah, this rebuilding of the temple, why is that significant here? Or what should be on our minds as we start thinking about Paul's metaphor here?
Well, even with Herod's upgrades, second temple was destroyed.
Yeah, it probably wasn't destroyed yet for this letter, but it is, Paul's using this metaphor. It's coming to an end. That's what Jesus said when he was there, right? He said, this is soon to be destroyed. Okay. What are the crossovers? What should we be keeping in mind as we think about the rebuilding of the temple, this focus on this foundation, and now Paul is bringing all those ideas forward. What should we be focused on, or what should we be thinking about?
And laying of the foundation. There were people who saw the first one was really good, and then they were really sad about the second one.
Yeah. There's this when they rebuilt the second temple, it was very anticlimactic, especially for people who had seen the first temple. Like they laid the foundation and said, "Oh, this is not going to be what Solomon built. we don't have those kinds of resources. Solomon basically captures the entire region and brings all of the resources and wealth and grandeur into building this temple and his own palace, and all these things. That's not what the second temple is going to be. So yeah, so that inadequacy of this new temple should certainly be on our minds.
And each of these each of these generations, whether it be the tabernacle and the forms of the tabernacle and the beams of the tabernacle, it's grains of dust that are disappearing in the place. This all turns to dust over time. And the next generation, the next era that comes along, they've got stones from the original. They're all dust. And now you're looking at Nehemiah, even to the Herod's temple, they're all dust. They're all turning to dust. Every one of us generations need to realize that the harder we try to grasp on this physical building, the more important the message is of the eternal building that we're part of right now. And that's where our grasp and our anchor is.
Yeah, I love that.
All of these other edifices.
Yeah, I love that. This, like, and really bringing up the foundation idea. This is bringing in this story of rebuilding our temple to the God of the universe, right? Which implies that this could be destroyed. That we were building something that was meant to stand for eternity, but God allowed it to be destroyed, which is a big portion of the prophets are trying to understand and trying to help people understand why that happened and what was going on there. And so for him to bring in this idea is certainly important to think about the permanency of these things.
Right? It's filled with swift transition.
The vision table is the foundation of the prophets and the apostles, but Jesus Christ himself, the cornerstone,
Yeah.
the chief cornerstone by which all other visions of building up to come from.
Yeah. And if we're to look at Ephesians, where Paul talks about the same idea, he really draws out this idea of Jesus is the chief cornerstone. And so here he just kind of talks about this foundation idea, but Jesus as the cornerstone, and then in Ephesians he says the apostles and the prophets are building the foundation upon Jesus as the cornerstone. So just kind of extending this metaphor a little bit. In what way is Jesus the cornerstone? And what does that mean for this structure, this edifice that is being built?
All the dimensions of the building are based on deriving from that one chief stone. That's the way I understood it.
Yeah, so the cornerstone is the first stone. It's the most important one to put in place. It's always put into bedrock or some unmovable thing. And so and everything comes off of that. Jesus as the cornerstone, what does that imply? What's special about Jesus being the cornerstone?
He's the standard for which the whole building is actually measured.
Okay.
If you begin with this particular cornerstone and stay faithful to that cornerstone furnishes the standard of measure in terms of spirituality, obedience, and submission and servanthood. That's the standard that we see in Jesus Christ. He's the building. It doesn't matter which tribe we're from. It doesn't matter which nation we're from. It doesn't matter which era we're from. If we have that same cornerstone, we have the same standard of measure.
Absolutely. Sorry, sometimes I try and ask questions to bring up a certain point, but I'm not super good at that. So I'm just gonna say the thing that so the permanency of Jesus as the cornerstone, right? Whereas the old temple, you can dig up that cornerstone, and just bring this whole structure down. The whole point, the whole idea in the prophets is that the cornerstone that we did use was faulty, and so we need a new cornerstone. We need a true cornerstone that's going to be laid at this new promised temple. And so Jesus being that cornerstone is a more reliable, it's a straighter, a truer, the eternal cornerstone that cannot be moved. And so in addition, I think Royce and David are absolutely right. In addition to that is the true thing that all other things ought to be measured off of. It's also this idea of permanence and resiliency. Yeah. So let's talk about that idea of building on top of this temple now. So verse 12 says, now if any man builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each man's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire. The fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. Okay. So he's extending this metaphor just a little bit more. So you kind of got to follow this idea. So he's saying there's these workmen that are building up the temple, and they're using these different materials: gold, silver, stone, wood, hay, straw. And so the day is going to reveal with fire the workmanship here. So where are we moving into this metaphor? Are we talking about building an actual structure, or what are we talking about right now? Okay. Why do you say that? Yeah, so there's divisions in the church. People are following certain people. So he's pointing them back to the cornerstone, or to this foundation. What is in this metaphor of building? What's the structure made out of? Right, as the metaphor, but what's that metaphor standing in for? So initially it was this field, and they're planting seeds, and people are growing, people are the seeds. So in this construction metaphor, what is the construction material?
Well, later in First Peter 2, he says, you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house. So in one sense, we're the building materials.
Yeah, that's his whole point here, is that the quality of the people that are part of this temple is going to be tested by fire on the day, and each man's workmanship is going to reveal itself once that happens. And so, what day is he talking about? In the Bible, there's a day, the day of judgment, the day of the Lord is often what it's called in Scripture. And so for at least for me, I tend to think about the judgment day as a day in the future when Jesus is going to return, make all things right. In Scripture, there's often more than one day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is just a day of judgment, or a day of this intense arrival of some sort of judgment or justice. It sometimes means that the temple is destroyed, right? That was the day of the Lord when the Babylonians come in and destroy God's own temple. It's this judgment upon the people of Israel, which results in this intense, fiery type persecution. And so I think it's a much more useful way of thinking about the day of the Lord, is to think of it as a pattern that happens in the world sometimes, and ultimately it's all pointing to the day of the Lord, the final day of judgment, which will be like times 1,000 of this kind of thing. And so if we're thinking about the day of the Lord here, which reveals each man's work by, through this fire, what's Paul getting at? What's his point here? We could just string it all together very, very nicely and succinctly for us.
Your works have to be laid on the foundation, distribute the foundation through the cornerstone. And if they're not, it's suffer.
Yeah. Yeah, so everything has to be built correctly in accordance with the foundation, with the cornerstone. And then the things that are being put onto this foundation is people, right? That's what we're saying. It's these people. And so if you've been brought in and set up as part of this temple, but you are real shaky in your understanding of what's what, if you were told that you can, when you get here, things are going to be awesome. You probably make more money. You'll get promoted. Our God's awesome, and so when the fires of persecution come, right? When things get difficult, when people aren't treating me amazing, and suddenly it's revealed that my faith was nothing but it was made of straw, right? It was not properly set up. Then that's going to be revealed, right? And maybe maybe I was baptized. Maybe I'll be saved. That's what Paul says here. They'll be saved, but as one through fire. But the point is that make sure that when you're setting people in, when you're bringing people in, and when they're getting set up, it's done in a way that is for eternity. Right? You want them to be part of this thing for eternity, to withstand the fires and tribulations and all this.
Factions and divisive person.
Yep.
Is that what you bring to this edifice that God has built?
Right.
That's problematic.
Yeah. What is a factious and divisive person? What kind of stones are they going to lay? Yeah, and if you're laying these stones that aren't made to last, and they're not built on something that's true, right? It's built on this factiousness. It's built on my ideas as Apollos or whatever it was. Then it's of course it's going to fail because it's not true to the foundation. It's not true to nature. So when the hardship comes, I mean this. I hope it's as cool to you as it is to me. This is the reason the church is still here today. The reason is because for 2,000 years, people have been building on this foundation, which is Jesus Christ, and they've been laying gold and silver and stone, and these people are staying true to who Jesus is as the foundation, the cornerstone. And so for us, what else is there for us except to continue to lay ourselves and our children and anybody that comes in here, also on top of that, and continue to shave off the stuff that doesn't fit, which is our vices and our sins and our factiousness and all these other things, and be conformed to that pattern.
Really agree. I love that.
Yeah.
It's fun to think of. Anyway, feel like I'm tracking well, and then I get to verse 15.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Awesome. Let's go there now. So verse 14, if any man's work which he has built on it remains, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. And then he gets into this, he kind of lands the plane, do you not know that you are a temple of God? And so, first let's talk about the rewards, and then we'll talk about the other stuff. So, what reward is Paul referring to? And does anybody else in the Bible that you can think of speak of rewards for growth and work and faithfulness? His name starts with J and it ends with Jesus. Yeah. Yes, that's one of his main things, right? As he says, the one who's faithful will be given much. Right? If you continue to add, even more will be given. So it's this idea of production and increase and growth, and it's not in money and the stuff that as Americans we think about first. It's in this realm right here, which is the same idea that Paul is talking about. Is you're growing the church, you're growing Jesus's body, you're growing in resiliency and building on these things. So it's like you, as somebody who's building, are going to be rewarded for building and adding and contributing, right? You're just one of the builders on site, right? Who is the chief architect of Solomon's temple? We don't know, right? We don't know who the head mason was. We don't know any of those names. They were all part of this process of building this temple. And so for us here, the point is that you're going to have a small part to play in this. Maybe it's just your children. Maybe it's a few neighbors, friends, people that come in the door on Sunday. You're going to have a small part to help build on this foundation, and you're going to be rewarded in some way that's commensurate with that. Now, if the work that you do is burnt up, what does he say? If you're trying to add to it, but you're only adding wood and hay to the structure, and it's the chaff, right? It gets blown off. What's that mean? Yeah, you're suffering loss, right? You wanted to contribute, but you weren't true to this thing. But it seems like you're a builder in some way. You're trying to be faithful, and so perhaps that'll be enough. You still might be saved, but through fire, it says.
What does the but through fire mean?
I think it means the same thing as the fire that's right before that, right? It's this testing. It's this. You might make it through as well, but it'll cost you dearly. Yeah.
The faith chapter in Hebrews lists a number of people who were not able to actually lay the gold foundation. Their work was stolen. They were killed. They were sawn asunder. They were torn by tigers and everything. Every other standard that we would say is a failure. And there were churches at the time. Thessalonica was one of those churches, a number of churches that had tremendous persecution. And God keeps going back and saying, the foundation you've laid is your trust and your fidelity. Yeah. Your faithfulness is recognized. Even though you and your family and your entire community are wiped out in the arena, faithful.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, again, that's this beautiful image. Like, has anybody been to the church at Corinth? Anybody visited there? It doesn't exist anymore, right? It's not there. None of these churches are, but the church is here, right? Jesus is here and victorious. And it's through that suffering, it's through that loss, and it's through the witness of that loss, right? It's going into the arena willingly and thankfully that you can suffer on behalf of Jesus's name. That's what builds that foundation. So it's like that person might die, but that doesn't mean that the foundation or that they're out of the temple anymore. And so in my mind, that the image isn't grandma dies and so we remove her brick. No, grandma was faithful for years and years and years, and she she is a gold and silver testament to what it means to be Christ-like. And so I don't see her as gone as much as now part of this heavenly temple forever. Yeah.
Stuff, and just think about, well, think of all the problems there are. It's going to be revealed what problems are, and God allows. Back after we sex, we make the false sex and the false sex. And what's going to happen? That's going to be revealed for what it is. And it's not going to stand, so to speak. If that's what the point is.
Yeah.
Their case is drifting, we have a lot of sins that are complicating their service to God. These things aren't going to be revealed for what they are. But at the same time, he's not just writing people off the board. He wants that sexual mess cleaned out, but he wants that person saved. He wants him to make through this fight
Yeah.
on the judgment day and be there. And if he's not, all of a sudden lost. He knows.
Yeah, and that's kind of how he wraps up everything. I just want to point out one more thing, and then we'll wrap up for today. Verse 17, if any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, and that is what you are. So it just gets back to this idea of, I allowed my temple to be destroyed before. You might lose your life on that day when things come, but there will be this justice ultimately, and just because you were destroyed doesn't mean that my temple's going anywhere. It's holy and it's mine. So.
Destroys the temple of God, corrupting it with false doctrine.
Yeah, it's interesting because every translation is an interpretation to some extent. I don't know if I might agree with them if I studied this passage a little bit more closely, but especially because the couple verses beforehand is talking about this literal persecution and suffering that they're going to go through. To me, destroying the temple, especially because he just said that they are the temple, just means killing them through persecution. That there's going to be these things, and people are going to try and hurt you and harm you and cause you to switch over. So I think that's where I would go with it, but there could be some interesting things to explore in that direction too.
Saul of Tarsus got the message. In his blindness, he got the message of his vision. He heard someone say, "You're persecuting me." Who was it? It wasn't a local church. That wasn't a local missionary. Jesus himself told him, "You are persecuting me."
Yep.
And this is exactly what God said. You try to destroy the church, I'll destroy you. Jesus is the church, the foundation of the church.
That's right.
Try to destroy him. It may take all of your lifetime, all of your Jesus, but guess who's standing?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, and Jesus has taken away the enemy's tool, right, of sin and death. And so without that, the enemy has nothing. So all they can do is kill us, and that just makes the church stronger, right? Next week, Revelation 20 to 22. Real straightforward, simple passage. I'm sure it'll be very clear to us how the temple relates in that book. Thank you. You get that to Trevor?